Hello and welcome to what I consider to be the three most important pawn endgame concepts. Through 7 examples in the video today, we're going to be talking about pawn freeze, we're going to be talking about pawn independence, and pawn breakthroughs. I do want to emphasize that if you're already familiar with these concepts and they're going to seem very basic, but that's because if you're not familiar, these are the most basic fundamental concepts that will definitely elevate your chess. And so this video might not be for those who are very comfortable already in pawn endgames. So let's begin already with pawn freeze. And this is a concept that essentially describes a situation where one pawn stops multiple of the opponent's pawns. And so here we have a situation where white has a free pawn on the king side. And that means that if there is nothing to be concerned about on the queen side, this pawn will win the game for white. The issue is if you just begin pushing it, black's going to make a queenside pawn with the move a5. And suddenly it becomes a situation where now there is counterplay and you're going to have to bring your king back and stop, and it's going to be a draw. So what you want to do instead is before you play on the king side, you freeze up the situation completely on the queen side. And now they no longer can go a6 or a5 because you're just going to take this one. And very importantly, your pawn is close enough to promote that they're not winning this race, because that's kind of the one condition that you have to check. And therefore, after you play the move b5, the only winning move in the position, you are now truly free to just continue with your play, and there's going to be nothing that they can do. You're going to slowly bring up your king and your pawn together, and eventually, the one thing to be familiar about here is there's no stalemate possibilities. That's the benefit, because now they're forced to give away the pawn, and you can, if you want, under promote to a rook and mate them, and it's a very easy conversion. Now let's move on to a situation where we're going to take the same fundamental concept of a pawn freeze, and we're going to apply it in a slightly more complex situation. So in this position, what you can notice is once again, we're winning on the king side. If we can take the queen side out of the equation, white is completely winning. The issue though is that we need to consider the queen side, because again, if we just randomly push and play on the king side, they're going to have the time and comfort to play a move like b5 or b6 and completely run us over on this side of the board. So if we go back, the first move you want to make is the move c5. And the point is, again, we are freezing up the play that black has. 2 of our pawns are enough to completely stop the black 4 pawns on the queen side, because if they ever play b6 or b5, we're just going to take twice. And again, importantly, our pawn is quicker to promote than our opponents, and we win the game. Now let's move on to the second important concept, which I'm going to be calling pawn independence. And this happens when your opponent's king is super active and your king is nowhere to be found, and you need to evaluate whether or not you can win this position, or if the activity of the black king will simply allow them to take the pawns and draw the game. And so in a situation like this, the important thing to understand is whether or not your pawns can support themselves without the need of an extra king or an extra piece. And in this case, the answer is definitely yes. So we're going to look at 3 examples that are useful to know. The second you know these, you can apply them all the time. So in this case, you can either play g5 or f5. And the point is, if they ever go to take the pawn that is supporting the other pawn, that means that they've committed to going too far down the board, and your other pawn will be able to promote. So here, for example, g6 just wins. But if we switch the situation a little and we get a situation like this, the important thing to understand is they can never take the pawn that is vulnerable that they could potentially take, legally at least, because then the other pawn will promote. So when pawns are situated like this, they're really good at stalling, and that's all you need to do. You're not going to be able to promote independently. You're going to need to bring your king in, then you're going to be able to win, because you know the pawns are going to be able to hold themselves until that point. Let's look at another situation, another example. Here, notice that, again, we're going to get the king in. And so the question is, can these pawns support each other until our king can come in? So if we go king to b2, the important thing to note here, the important pattern to take away, is that the second the king comes to f6, we go h6. And again, they can't take this pawn because this promotes, and they can't attack the more forward pawn because it's simply not legal. And so they go back, and now we get the king in further. And if they now, come here and try to attack this pawn, we can go f6. And it's actually going to be the same pattern that will be able to completely defend these pawns. Similarly, if on the first move, black went king h6, we go f6, and you get the point. These pawns support each other until the king comes and aids them to promotion. Let's look at a final example of this same concept, which is now no longer two pawns. It's a pawn and a knight, or a pawn and a bishop it could be. Essentially, in this situation, you need to understand where to put the knight. If you go for the move knight c7, which is very logical, you want to defend the pawn. The issue, though, they're going to go king to c6. And now they're going to be able to take the knight while simultaneously keeping your pawn in check, because you're not going to be able to just run the pawn up the board. They're still in a position to defend and hold that pawn. So if we go back, the actual correct move is the pretty unnatural knight a4. And the idea is now the difference, they no longer can take the knight while still stopping our pawn for promotion, because again, if they go down the board to capture that piece, we're going to run up the board and they're simply not going to be in time to stop it. So the move knight a4, an important one to know here, the basic concept is, again, to hold the pawn, keep it safe until the king comes, and now you can promote. So this now takes us to the final concept, which is pawn breakthroughs. By far, it's the most complicated idea, but it's also, in my opinion, the most interesting, and it's very practical. I think it will win you many games. In this position, note that white is up 2 pawns. So if they can consolidate the situation on the king side by playing a move like g4 and not let you make any progress there, they're simply going to win the game. You need to, as black, therefore, create a ton of chaos on this king side. The move is g4. And concretely, you see that this actually ends up working. You're sacrificing material, but it allows you to get 1 pawn promoted, and that's all you need. In this case, if they take the pawn on h4, you take on h3, and you're quicker to promote. And similarly, they take on g4, you go h3, and you're also quicker to promote. So it's this idea of sacrificing a pawn, or 2 or 3. In fact, there's going to be another example that you're going to see. We sacrifice a lot of material. As long as we get that 1 golden pawn that can promote, it's all worth it. And let's go ahead to that example. In this position, it doesn't seem like black can make much progress, but in fact they can. We play the move c4 here. And the point, okay, if they take like this, then we simply go a4, and we're going a3 next, and we have a 2-on-1 on these files, on the B and A file, and so we're going to win this position very easily. The important and critical line, the more beautiful line, is if they take like this, because now we play the move a4 anyways, and after they capture, we go b3. We're distracting the pawn from defending the square on d3, and so after they take, otherwise we're going to take, then we can push, and we get that 1 promotion. So we sacrifice 3 pawns, all with the goal of promoting 1, which again, all that we need. So this is 3 very basic but very critical pawn concepts to know. I think if you apply them to endgames, you're going to already be better at evaluating who's doing better and who's winning. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe if you're new around here. Like this video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.